So today we're here to talk about slip and fall accidents, specifically at a grocery store or department store.
Colton handles a lot of slip and fall cases in commercial settings. Colton, why don't you tell us about what you look for? What are the factors that make a good slip and fall case or a viable slip and fall case?
A good factor for a good slip and fall case is if the slip and fall occurred in an area where there's no warning signs, the hazard is somewhat invisible to the eye until after the fall occurs, whether or not the area where the slip and fall occurred was a high traffic area, if it's near the entrance of a grocery store, near the entrance of a department store, there's a lot of foot traffic, posing a higher standard to ensure that the premises near that area with a lot of traffic is safe.
What's the expectation of the property itself? Like, what are they supposed to do that you look for to see whether they did or didn't do or take necessary steps to protect people coming in from having slip and fall accidents on their property?
So for example, in stores near the entrance area during seasons when it's raining, where there's precipitation outside, water from the outside gets treaded towards the interiors of the shopping mall or the grocery store or department store. Most stores would lay down carpets on the ground, make sure they're securely attached to the ground, put warning signs outside. They're going to take additional precautionary measures to ensure more employees inspect the area, for example.
Let's use that example. It's wet outside, they're walking in and they slip, versus if they've already been in the store for an hour or two shopping and they're exiting the store. If you're coming in from outside and you've got wet shoes, you're going to be acting more cautious. You have an expectation that the floors are wet. But now if you've been in the store, you've had no problem navigating the store, your footwear is dry, you've been in there 2 hours, maybe the weather started after we were already in the store, and now you're exiting and you don't really have an expectation of a slippery surface by the doors, because they also would look at, okay, what was the expectation of the person who fell as well. I've seen cases where that circumstance plays into it as well, that they actually fell while exiting the store as opposed to entering. Every case, I think, is very fact-specific.
It really depends on a lot of small details of the case, and every single case might be different.
All right, so you mentioned looking at the location of where the fall occurred, what the store did or didn't do, whether they put down mats or not. Sometimes the defendant could argue you were wearing the inappropriate footwear for the conditions. So if it's a really rainy day and you're wearing flip-flops that have no tread at all, they'll try to blame the victim. It's also really important to save your shoes. Let your lawyer photograph them, preserve them, don't throw them out, because that's going to be important in the context of the litigation. The defense almost always, in a slip and fall case, wants to know what you were wearing on your feet to see if that caused or contributed at all to the fall.
And how old the shoes were.
How worn they were they in good condition?
How the treads were at the bottom of the soles, were they new, were they old with very little tread and you were wearing them when it was raining?
How often does surveillance or CCTV footage come into play in these premises cases on commercial properties?
CCTV footage is very important to the case because that also shows exactly how the fall occurred, whether or not anything was done to the premises to keep the premises safe prior to the slip and fall occurring, what kind of substance that the individual might have slipped on.
What do you do to ensure that footage gets preserved?
So it's very important to, after you have a slip and fall accident, to notify the employees of the grocery store, the department store. Also very important to get a lawyer as soon as possible, because as soon as you retain a lawyer, the lawyers will send a notice letter out, and within the notice letter, it would remind them that they need to preserve the footage as evidence for the subsequent case.
What other information, documents, records do you look for from the potential defendant, the store in this case?
A sweep log or a mop log, any outside contractors that might be responsible for the maintenance of the property, even schedules of employees, who was working at the time, what kind of training they had in their position, and even training manuals of its employees that ensures that we're fully aware of what type of precautionary measures the store has in place. Most big name grocery stores, department stores, they all have some sort of sweep log or inspection logs within procedures and protocols.
So if there's a premises owner out there watching, what's their duty?
Maintain the area in a safe manner to ensure customers are safe while they're on the premises.
What's the biggest fighting ground in these kind of cases, slip and falls on commercial properties, between you and the insurance company?
Of course. More often than not, in terms of liability or whose fault it is. For example, in slip and fall matters, insurance companies would always bring up what's known as contributory negligence, which essentially is they're trying to proportion part of the fault to the person who had a slip and fall. For example, they weren't paying attention, they weren't looking where they're walking, they were carrying a lot of items, causing them to lose focus, or they weren't wearing the appropriate footwear, for example, as previously stated.
So let's say they mopped an area recently, the floor is wet, and they put up the caution sign. How does that factor into your assessment of a case?
It really depends on, where the caution sign was placed, the area that's posed as a hazard, were there sufficient warning signs to begin with? Were they supposed to section off a certain area and divert pedestrians to another way around the store?
In my view, obviously, if the store is putting up caution signs, they're trying their best to protect their visitors, then yeah, of course that comes into our consideration on whether or not there's a viable case or not. As a default, I would say if there is a caution sign, maybe there isn't a viable case. However, we have seen cases, and I can remember one in particular where there was a caution sign, but yet they essentially forced their customers to walk through the area that was the most hazardous area in the store. They closed off the other sections, they put it right behind the cashier. These people had no choice. So the caution sign, while it was a caution and it helped the store somewhat, they failed to really mitigate the risk. When it would have been really easy to allow customers to leave the store a different way, they essentially forced people to go through an area that they knew was extremely slippery.
I guess the question is, what more could they have done easily to prevent the hazard in the first place? Injuries that we typically see in slip and fall cases can range soft tissue injuries, bruises, bumps, to more serious injuries where individuals sustain fractures, tears, requiring surgery.
Head injuries is another.
A concussion, if they hit their head on the ground after falling.
We've even seen, unfortunately, really serious head injuries resulting in death.
I've experienced a lot of clients who told me that after they fell, they felt embarrassed and, they just try to get out of the store. They didn't report their injuries to the stores, or they didn't take any pictures of where they slipped and fell on.
So what would you suggest to people if they have a slip and fall and they're feeling embarrassed and they might not recognize the severity of their injuries? What do you suggest?
Try to document everything that you can on the spot immediately after the fall while they're still at the store. Maybe a little fall at that moment wouldn't render anything serious, but let's say in a week's time, and if even in a few hours' time, they realize that, hey, I have concussion symptoms that I never realized until a few hours or a day later. After you leave the store, all that evidence is essentially mopped up.
And if somebody has already left the store, they got embarrassed, they left, they just got home and they're realizing they're having symptoms, would you recommend they go back to the store and make sure it's reported and save your receipt if you purchased anything, which will help verify the time when you were there?
Of course. So even if the individual has left the store without reporting it, I always recommend clients to go back to the store to make a formal report. Having something reported later is better than having something not reported at all.
And what about incident reports? Tell us what that is and how those are used.
So an incident report is a set form in which its employees basically document date, time, the name of the person who slipped and fell, what the injuries were, what caused the slip and fall accident. Sometimes it might even contain photographs that the employees take after the fact. And they're basically used as record keeping to keep a record of every single incident that occurs within the store.
It's incumbent upon you there to also do your own investigation. The same way they're recording your name and contact information, ask for the name of the manager, ask for the full names of the employees that were present at the time. If there's a witness or anybody that helped you or witnessed you fall or helped you immediately after the fall, like another customer, don't rely on the store to record that information because they may or may not. You obtain that information so that you can provide it to your lawyer later. Incident report is not for you, it's for them. It's to protect the store. Very often they don't share the incident report. Sometimes they do, but more often than not, they don't share it with the person who was injured. It's really a document designed for the benefit of the store to help them defend the claim in the event that there's ever a claim brought against them. If they ask you for a statement signed, just tell them you're not prepared to write anything down at this point, and just tell them what happened and let them write their own notes. You can always provide a statement later with the guidance and advice of a lawyer working for you. Generally speaking, in your experience, do department stores and grocery stores, do they typically resolve slip and fall accidents, or do they fight them aggressively?
More often than not, they do resolve it even without going to trial or without going to court. I would always recommend to get a lawyer. The insurance companies know that individuals without a lawyer, they don't have the background to understand how the claims process works, how the assessment of damages are like or worth. At least speak with the lawyer to get their opinion so that they can provide you with the correct legal advice. So just to recap, make sure you notify the store so that it's well documented. Take pictures of the surrounding area, specifically with the area where you had a slip and fall. Speak with any witnesses and get their contact information so that your lawyers can contact them. Make sure you get appropriate medical attention just so that it's well documented that following the slip and fall that you required medical attention. Continuously make appointments to speak with your medical professional as the case progresses or as your injuries progress, because you never know. A little bump on the head might render someone to have a very serious traumatic brain injury. And last of all, it's very important to contact your lawyer as soon as possible so that they can guide you in terms of the legal process and next steps to take in order to preserve your claim. Thank you so much for listening. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact us. Our contact details are in the show notes below.